Hi, my name's Kate Ellis, and I'm the author of 20 crime novels, most of which feature my hard-working detective D.I. Wesley Peterson. One of the greatest pleasures of my job is research, and my exploration of history and human nature takes me to some exciting, strange, and rather unexpected places. When I first began my career, I found it hard to decide whether to set my books in the past or the present day. I've always had a real passion for history, but on the other hand, I wanted to write about today's society and what drives people to commit the ultimate crime, taking the life of another human being. Now, when I started work on my first novel, The Merchant's House, I wanted to centre my plot around a terrible dilemma with many murderous possibilities. And the subject so intrigued me that for a while I was prepared to abandon my interest in history to write about the contemporary world. Then I had an idea. Why not have two narratives, one from the past and one from the present? After all, the problem I was writing about was as relevant to the people of the 17th century as it is today. So I began to weave two stories together. A modern-day murder investigation and a 17th century crime revealed in the diary of a Devon merchant. And to my delight, it worked well, and in all of my Wesley Peterson books since, I've used historical and contemporary cases entwined together, one story reflecting the other, old sins and new. I enjoy the challenge of using a different period of history in each book. In my recent book, The Jackal Man, I researched the bizarre world of an obsessive Edwardian Egyptologist. And my latest book, The Cadaver Game, was inspired when I came across the tale of a sinister manhunt in the early 19th century. To me, history is full of inspiration. The author L.P. Hartley famously wrote, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." But is this altogether true? In the course of my research, I've made some surprising discoveries. Now, I'm not going to argue that the past wasn't a very different place from the present, but we do tend to think that the dilemmas and preoccupations of the modern world are entirely new, and that we are the first generation to experience them. But have things really changed much through the ages? Let's consider a few examples. Now, one feature of modern life is the compensation culture. Think of all those adverts on telly saying that if you've had an accident within the past 5 years, you might be entitled to thousands of pounds in compensation. Now, surely this was thought up by some ambulance-chasing lawyers in the States. But you might be surprised to know that it's considerably older than that. When St. Augustine first landed in Kent in 597 AD, he persuaded King Ethelbert to write down his laws which contained a great deal of detail about compensation. If someone broke your arm, for instance, the compensation due to you would be 6 shillings, £600 in today's money. The loss of a foot was 50 shillings, £5,000, and the same for a loss of an eye, and so on. We still put monetary value on injuries today. In the after the 7/7 bombings, a broken leg was valued at £3,300. And total paralysis or brain injury at £250,000. And we complain today about the burgeoning culture of government surveillance. Apparently, there are about 14 million CCTV cameras watching our every move today. But back in the 11th century, William the Conqueror used every means in his power to exert control over his population. And he sent out his agents to compile the Doomsday Book, detailing every community in England, every person and their possessions. This was an exercise in state control on a national level to ensure that he could squeeze every penny of taxes out of the English. Now, almost 1,000 years later, we worry again about what information the state has on us and how it will be used. Now, how the Normans would have loved CCTV camera. And throughout the ages, there have been privileged people who have abused their positions of power. For instance, in the Middle Ages, the great Cistercian monasteries of North Yorkshire, which began as communities of prayer and simple poverty, gradually became commercial corporations rich on the profits of sheep farming and mining. Archaeologists excavating monastic sites often find that the skeletons of monks show signs of dish. It's a skeletal deformity caused by overeating. Perhaps these were the forerunners of the fat cats of today's business and banking world. But surely crime's worse today than it's ever been? Probably not. If we were to travel back in time to 18th century London, we might come across a report written in 1751 by Henry Fielding. He's the author of Tom Jones and also the founder of the Bow Street Runners. This report was entitled An Inquiry into the Causes of the Late Increase in Robbers. Fielding encountered all those crimes we know today: robbery, theft, rape, murder, criminal gangs and organised crime. And back in the 15th century, things were no better. In the 1450s, a lady called Margaret Peston wrote that, "I have never heard say of so much robbery and manslaughter in this country as is now." In Margaret's letters, there are many references to robbers breaking into houses and ambushing unwary travellers. In a letter of 1461, she warns her husband, "Beware how you ride or go, for naughty and evil-disposed fellowships." And she added, "God, for his mercy, send us a good world." Interestingly, a professor from St Andrews University has discovered that hoodies are nothing new. They were very much in favour with 12th century juvenile delinquents. Teenage apprentices, it seems, were the scourge of London back then. Violent, lawless, and away from parental control, they often rioted and made trouble, and they'd used their hooded tops to conceal their identity. Research into history throws light on the nature of the human condition. We share many of the preoccupations of our ancestors. We can feel the resentment of the Anglo-Saxon when his new masters, the Normans, come to collect details of his personal life and possessions for William the Conqueror's Doomsday Book. And we can empathise with Margaret Peston when she worries about her husband being attacked on a journey. We know how the 18th century Londoner feels as he picks his way past the threatening, gin-sodden drunks on the streets, trying desperately not to attract the attention of all those ruffians and robbers hiding in the shadows. I consider the job of a crime writer is to examine human nature and human frailty, something that, let's face it, hasn't changed at all over the centuries. The same old instincts of avarice, lust, hatred, love, jealousy and resentment apply as much today as they've always done, leading the weak and the wicked to commit that ultimate crime, murder. Now, leaving the past behind for a moment, I also do a good deal of research into present-day life. There are the technicalities, of course, the latest developments in policing, forensic science and cybercrime. But I also need a working knowledge of poisons, much to my husband's disgust, and various causes of death. But I never lose sight of the fact that most crime novels are by their nature mysteries, and my culprit has to keep everyone fooled until that final chapter. Now, physical masks hide our identity when we're doing something bad, but what about the sort of masks we can't see? Over the centuries, wrongdoers have hidden behind another sort of mask altogether, an invisible mask, the Mask of Innocence. Now, Shakespeare's Hamlet famously said, "The devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape," and our modern age, with its technological advances, offers many opportunities for the devilish to get one over on the unsuspecting. The internet affords its users a degree of anonymity unthinkable in the days before mass electronic communication. And there have been many cases of people hiding behind a created online identity. How easy it must be for a potential predator to use the mask of the internet to conceal his true intentions. There are lots of online cons taking in the lonely, trusting and vulnerable. But something the police regard as a major problem is internet grooming. A predatory middle-aged man often pretends to be an attractive boy who strikes up a relationship with an innocent teenager of his purported own age. In one particularly disturbing case, the perpetrator actually turned up at the girl's house pretending to be the fictitious boy's father, saying he was going to take her to a meeting she'd arranged with his son. The girl trusted him because his mask, both as nice teenage boy and caring father, had been so convincing, and I'm afraid to say the result was tragic. There have always been people prepared to employ an innocent persona to conceal their true natures. There's the con man who plays the part of a helpful tradesman or concerned passerby to prey on the elderly or vulnerable, or indeed any of us might be fooled if the wrongdoer's mask is constructed well enough. Then there is the man or woman who uses the mask of innocence to commit the ultimate crime, murder. We seem particularly intrigued by murderers who present an unimpeachable face to the world. Somehow, both in real life and in crime fiction, these mask wearers seem far more fascinating than the obvious gangster or villain where what you see is what you get. But what about women? The gender known before the advent of feminism as the fair sex. We have to face the fact that should an attractive woman, or even a comfortably maternal woman, commit a heinous crime, society tends to regard her more harshly than her male counterpart. She's smashed society's expectation that women are protectors and nurturers. They're naturally gentle, and they give life rather than take it. Society regards women like the Moors murderer Myra Hindley and Rose West, the female half of the duo who committed the infamous Cromwell Street murders, as monsters. Monsters who've used the mask of their femininity to lure their victims to a terrible fate. The public has always been particularly fascinated by a murderer who is not what he or she seems to be. And one case that has engaged us consistently since the later years of the 19th century is that of the Whitechapel murders. Who was Jack the Ripper? Quite an industry's grown up around that intriguing question, and I'm sure the enduring interest in the case is because the killer was often said to be someone who led a highly respectable life by day and became a depraved monster who cut prostitutes to pieces by night. Among the more interesting suspects have been Queen Victoria's grandson, the Duke of Clarence, and Her Majesty's own physician in ordinary, Sir William Withy Gull. The idea that the Whitechapel murderer was a high-born gentleman has proved enduringly popular. However, Jack's intimate knowledge of the Whitechapel area and his ability to disappear at will after the killings suggests that rather disappointingly, he was far more likely to have been a local man. That abiding image of the top-hatted toff lurking in the foggy shadows of Whitechapel and running rings round the police seems so much more appealing than the alternative solution of Jack being just some soldier or sailor or labourer with a grudge against the oldest profession. Perhaps this desire we have for Jack the Ripper to have been a respectable member of society is reflected in a fictional story which caught the public imagination when it was first published back in 1886. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, we have a doctor of impeccable character who is transformed into Mr. Hyde, a murderous, misanthropic monster. It's so easy for the evil Hyde to lurk behind Jekyll's amiable persona. And what better example is there of the unsavoury reality that may lie behind the mask of respectability? And talking of doctors, it's quite amazing that in the history of crime and criminals, there have been so many in that caring, healing profession who've ended up in the dock charged with murder. In fact, in my novel, The Flesh Tailor, that's an archaic term for surgeon, by the way, my detective, Wesley Peterson, examines a fictional website called Murderous Medics and finds it surprisingly fruitful. Now, we all know the name of Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen, a mild-mannered and staid American doctor who, after indulging his overblown, extravagant wife Cora's ambitions to be a music hall artiste, poisoned the Hyacine, cut up her body, and buried her in his cellar before absconding with his mistress. It's hard to contemplate a more docile and seemingly harmless man than Crippen. And there have been many other doctors who used the mask of their professional innocence to gain their victims' trust. Let me mention just a few of them. There was Dr. John Bodkin Adams, an Eastbourne GP with a reputedly calming bedside manner who benefited financially from the suspicious deaths of several of his patients back in the 1950s. He was tried for murder in 1957, but because of the brilliance of his defence, he walked free from the court. Then there was Dr. Buck Roxton, a highly respected GP up in Lancaster who was known to waive his fees if he thought his patients couldn't afford to pay. This kind, upright and respectable medical man strangled his wife, and he did the same to the housemaid to prevent her discovering his crime. He dismembered then mutilated their bodies before dumping them in a stream and was arrested for the crime in 1935. So notorious did this case become that children of this day set this verse to the tune of Red Sails in the Sunset, and I promise you I'm not going to sing. Red stains on the carpet, red stains on the knife. Oh, Dr. Buck Roxton, you've murdered your wife. Then Mary, she saw you. You thought she would tell. So Dr. Buck Roxton, you killed her as well. However, the most notable murderous doctor of recent years was Dr. Harold Shipman, a well-liked and trusted family doctor who turned out to be one of the most prolific serial killers in global history, with 215 murders ascribed to him, although the real numbers are undoubtedly higher. Dr. Shipman's patients loved him, and like Dr. Bodkin Adams and Dr. Buck Roxton before, he was regarded as a good and caring man. Again, the mask is brought into play. Benign exterior, hiding a terrible truth. As wrongdoers so often hide behind the mask of innocence in real life, it's hardly surprising that this kind of deception is used frequently in crime fiction. Indeed, a whodunit would hardly be a whodunit without a stunning surprise at the end. After all, if everything was just as it seemed, there'd be no mystery. And it's the unmasking of the murderer that provides the explosive climax in that final chapter. So where does this leave us? This uncomfortable fact that a villain might wear a smiling and innocent face, but might be carrying on all manner of horrendous crimes when we're looking elsewhere for the culprit. The Mask of Innocence is the reason we tell our children not to talk to kind strangers bearing sweets. This is why we instruct our elderly parents not to admit that nice, helpful man who calls at the door offering to do them a favour and mend their roof. And it is why, in this day and age, and no doubt in any other era too, we can't fully trust our fellow man. Fiction reflects life, and in crime fiction, as in life, people are often not what they seem to be on the surface. And so to conclude, my research takes me to some fascinating places, to the past and to the present, to the innermost workings of society and human nature. And that is why, for me, writing crime fiction is simply the best job in the world. Thank you for listening.